Having marched through the night, we had heard the distant rhythmic noises of construction echoing through the night. All who had heard it knew that those were the French, boldly constructing a route across the Danube, using the small Lobau island as a midpoint, crossing this great river as if it were a mere ditch in Napoleon's path. However, when dawn broke, the only noises were of our own troops. We did our best to keep silent, yet a few sounds were made as we had gathered into our 5 great columns of march. A mass of bodies garbed in our white uniforms and black shakos forming into clouds of infantry as the march commenced. I found myself amongst my fellow soldiers in the second column. Our ranks were a mix of younger, newly trained troops whose only tastes of battle, like myself, had been the last few days. Looking around, I could see those who had been veterans of the previous conflicts in 1805, some probably still waiting anxiously to have another try at those who had defeated them 4 years ago. Though personally, I was just thankful for the rest I had gotten, something that in the coming hours I would yearn for once again. We had been defeated or heard tales of defeats over the last few days, though none of it diminished our resolve. We had been preparing for this moment for a long time. Several hours went by where we had been marching until we finally came upon the bank of the river. Normally you would be able to see for miles, though most of that was now concealed by dust from the marching and a storm that had been mirroring the stealth in our own movements. I had no item in my pack or on my person to tell the time, though we did not stop in our march, and it was not much longer until the echoes of musket fire rang once more, signalling the beginning of what would be this great struggle. Our column continued to progress, the sounds of musket fire from the village of Aspern helping to navigate us into our own positions. Eventually, assaults into the village. It did not take long for cannon fire from both sides to be echoing in the distance, creating a battling melody of weapons in the air. I glanced up to see some of the advanced troops chattering and pointing as we saw distant blue shadows moving to work on the bridges again. The bridges had been broken by our own people, floating heavy objects downriver. Between those fortunate interruptions and the utter surprise that came over us at how little preparation had been put into the defences of the village, we had gone unexpected. The Second Corps were continuing to press on to the village, though we were more scattered as many of our eyes, both of those old and young, kept drifting towards the bending clouds of the white uniforms of the first column that were now attacking the village on 2 flanks. The further we closed in, the more our vision became obscured by the dust and smoke, holding out hope that we would not be hit by cannon or a stray musket fire. The deafness of our ears grew with every step under the myriad of lethal songs in the air. We had heard the order and our pace quickened, though we did our best to keep disciplined in formation, though some broke ahead of the rest as we started coming across a scattering of bodies on the approach, the once almost cloud-like white of their uniforms now marred by blood, dirt, and dust. Amongst the chaos, seeing uniformed soldiers garbed in both white and blue occasionally falling from the mediocre defences that had been set up. The screams and clashing metallic noises of melee had started creeping in. The fight for Aspern was a battle of noise, as our own general order to attack was sounded with our pace breaking into a rush, our own mass swarming onto a third flank. I could not help but let my mind imagine what this must have looked like for one of those defenders. Finally making my way through a great cluster of dust, my eyes were able to open once again to see the true lack of defences. It only increased my admiration for those stubbornly defending and holding us off, a tragic irony. A selection of no more than 7 of us held to give a minor covering volley, I saw one of those defenders slump down lifeless, though I had no way of knowing who had dealt the killing shot, or if it was truly one of us or worse. Breaching over the minor defences, I tried to have my eyes focused on reaching to the front once again, not wanting to see the truth of the battle that now occupied my peripheral vision. Pressing over further in, several of us quickly rushed to some minor elements of cover we could find as a returning French volley struck down 7 of our own. I took this moment to reload, my hands still quivering slightly, though it was less than I anticipated. Now within the village, none of us could afford to wonder what was going on in the rest of the battle, our focus being in taking every element of the village that the French held. In the chaos of the smoke and mass of bodies rushing, I thought I could see our own flags pushing forward, but it was not long until they were then being seen moving backwards. Rushing by, I found myself caught up in one of the melee clashes that were constantly pressing on, though with my musket loaded. I fired once again, aiding another as we both briefly watched the defender fall to his side, though a scream commanded a quick reaction as I raised my musket in time to block a strike from a French fusilier, who used his strength and force of attack to force me backwards, causing me to trip and lose my balance, stumbling backwards, though as my eyes drifted up, they only saw him jerk as a bayonet had signalled his end. Looking up, I was only able to see the back of the man who had saved me, watching him rush back towards the front, taking over the position where just moments before an older veteran soldier had been standing, his own end having been met by a musket. Evening had now set in. Aspern was engulfed in smoke of all different shades. The only knowledge that we had of the rest of the battle were the distant sounds of some occasional gallops of horses, including that of the Archduke himself, though I did not personally recall seeing him, as he had been calling forward the rest of the column to take the village, though the majority of the sounds that filled the air were merely a repetitive chorus of muskets, cannon, and the occasional bugle. The light around us continued to darken as time moved on and the firing continued, though the brutality and chaos of the day was now beginning to die out, and in its place merely became a sustained battleground as we were each filling a hole in the line, as the French defenders, ever remarkable in their stubborn defence, did the same, with the village now half blue and half white. I was one of the last in our area of the village to fire a shot before the firing died out for the night. I had not kept count of how many shots I had fired, though I could only confirm one meeting its target. There was little talk through the night, most trying to get what rest they could, though our ears remained ever alert. Many, especially amongst the newer soldiers like myself, remained focused, not allowing ourselves to drift off for a moment, whilst also trying to prevent our eyes from drifting to the dead and the wounded. There had been more sounds of marching in the distance. Some questioned what it might have been, but most of us knew it was another portion of the French making it across the river. Our breaking of the bridge had split them up nicely, but their marching continued to remind us that our job was not done yet. Night flew by like a wisp of wind, as the welcome quiet was broken by more firing even before the sun had risen. The French came at us again, this time in greater numbers and more ferocity that successfully forced us onto the back foot, and retook more land as, in the confusion, many of our men fell back to find better cover, some having left their shakos behind in the commotion of this abrupt and fierce attack. I saw the occasional body fall in my peripheral as we kept up our own fire with more melees. In this battle, some elements, including my own, were driven so far back we ended up outside the smouldering village, having to reform and redo what we had already accomplished, a cruel rehearsal. Unexpectedly, we had more bugles from both sides as French horses were seen on our own horizon in the battle. A fear overcame me as they were heading for the rear parts of our own flank. Many of us formed up to attempt a defence against this coming torrent, but to our fortune there was no need, as the sudden appearance of distant coats in white of our own reserve and a scattering of explosions of dirt and metal spat from the ground, as cannon fire had poured onto them, forcing them back. We had not known until after that was a part of a major push in the centre that had just been halted, saving us from being cut off. Now reformed and reassured at the sight of retreating French flags and soldiers in blue, a great yell came about as we poured into the fight for Aspern once again. This time I was on the front, and alongside several others we were able to force ourselves back in. The French defenders, now a mix of fresh soldiers that had spent most of the battle trapped on the other side of the river, and those who were now exhausted, nevertheless we fought through any of those who tried to challenge us. I lost all sense of time within this melee and exchange of musket fire as the occasional stray cannon shot fell into the village as well. I remember kicking a French soldier off of one of the men I had trained with, saving him from the struggle, though I also remember at this moment a sudden stroke of pain thrashing across the side of my arm, as a defender, or maybe one of our own by accident, had narrowly missed me. Moving to cover, I waited to see any signs of major blood, but it was no more than a cut to my deep relief. Grabbing my musket once more, I pushed back into the fight, the voices of our officers and most charismatic soldiers keeping our push going as at last the French were now in full retreat from the village. Some of the soldiers around me taking final shots, catching some unfortunate retreating troops, though not many. Upon making it to the other end of the village, the part that had almost always been in French hands throughout all of this, we could see a gathering land of ocean of blue beginning to withdraw. A sight had never been so fantastic. Though this beautiful relief was met with a great regret as many of us turned back to see the aftermath of our efforts, the village of Aspern had been painted over in blue and white. Tattered flags of both our empires lay, some still flapping in the mediocre winds that came in, whilst the amount of swords and muskets that now filled the streets and buildings I did not want to imagine. You could look nowhere but up to the sky to blind yourself from this. My eyes had crossed over the battlefield to the relatively distant village of Essling that sat on the opposite side of our bank. It too now only showcased smoke and the occasional flame, though like Aspern, only Austrian flags remained on some of its buildings. Our commanders did not order us to pursue, something that many of us were relieved about. Merely seeing the legendary Napoleon and his army retreating was a sight to be treasured, though we had been truly bloodied as well. Many of the fellow soldiers beginning to collapse from the exhaustion of this grand effort. Nevertheless, a question started to raise in many of our minds that had this effort, this stand over these 2 days, been enough? It had not. The Battle of Aspern-Essling had been fought on the 21st and 22nd of May 1809. It was a 2-day struggle to halt Napoleon's crossing of the Danube, the heavy objects that the Austrians floated downriver proving instrumental in aiding their victory, though the Austrian army had also been heavily reformed after the disasters of the Ulm campaign and Austerlitz back in 1805. Whilst the victory ended up proving hollow in the short term, after Napoleon returned and defeated Archduke Charles at Wagram, the victory proved more symbolic as it dealt Napoleon his first major land defeat in person to a coalition army since his campaign in Italy, and gave him a newfound respect for the Austrian soldiers. It further showed to the other coalition nations that Napoleon was not invincible, and gave them hope to carry on as the mix of British, Portuguese, and Spanish troops continued to pin down Napoleon's marshals in Spain. These elements helped to lay the groundwork for the coalition nations' victory over Napoleon. And after 3 attempts, that is the first short story reading finished. And for those of you who are watching this on YouTube, thank you for the little bit of patience. It took several attempts to get this done. I hope you enjoyed. Please do share with any other historical enthusiasts you like. It isn't going to be limited to this. I'm going to do readings of other works that are more fantasy or sci-fi focused as well, although that will more be chapters instead of short stories. But yes, please do comment, like, and subscribe. Please follow the social medias. Check out the ebooks on Lulu if you wish. And please also do check out the Twitch if you would like to see an author have a bit of madness on some games. So, yes, thank you, and until next time, welcome to the Kingdom of Avalas and the world of Fellow Mind books.